All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our panel today. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties in the beginning, but we're going to go ahead and jump right in. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen briefly, and then we can get in. All righty. All right, so today, as I'm sure everyone knows, we are going to be talking about movements. So really the beginnings, the meat and potatoes, the history, and visions for the future for our three acronyms we're going to be delving into really. So EJ, environmental justice, IE, intersectional environmentalism, and EL, environmental liberation. All right. So just a few guidelines for today. Nothing too major, but just so that we are sure that I'm gonna go through. So the first one, this is a community learning space. So really everyone here is really gonna be learning from each other. Panelists, the community, vice versa. So while we're learning, we will not tolerate any ageism, gatekeeping, disrespect, or any other ivory tower attributes. We really encourage you all to utilize the chat as much as possible. And if you have any questions that you would like answered in the middle, we're going to have a Q&A session. You can put them in there. Our learning objectives for today, everyone, getting that comprehensive understanding of EJ, IE, and EL, insight into the work of each panelist and their organization, as well as their insight into ideas for the future within their organization and individually as well as how we can all support each other and as well get involved. All right, so let me do some introductions. Representing EJ, we have Anthony Carifa Rogers Wright. So Anthony serves as the Director of Environmental Justice at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, NYLPI. In this capacity, he guides and coordinates the organization's EJ strategy, litigation, organizing, and advocacy initiatives. Prior to joining NYLPI, Anthony was the policy coordinator and Green New Deal policy lead for the Climate Justice Alliance, where he assisted with developing and promulgating local, state, and federal organizing and policy strategy for the Alliance's 74 grassroots, frontline-led organizations across the country. A veteran of social justice campaigns, Anthony helped lead the effort to make the former Colorado Health Insurance Cooperative the first health insurance provider in the state's history to remove transgender exclusions from all of their policies in 2012. He has acted as a policy advisor for numerous candidates for elected office, including Senator Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign in 2020, and Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns in 2020 and 2016, when he represented the campaign during testimony to the DNC platform committee. Anthony was selected as one of the grist.org 50 environmentalists you'll be talking about in 2016. He's written numerous articles discussing the axiomatic nexus of the climate crisis and racial injustice, and has spoken on the subject at universities throughout the US and in Europe. Anthony serves on the board directors of Friends of the Earth, Backbone Campaign, and Center for Sustainable Economy, as well as the advisory committee for Evergreen Action, and is blessed to be the father of his energetic and very loquacious 6-year-old son, Zahir Cielo, aka Bean. He received his BA in Environmental Science and Policy and his master's degree in Community Development, Environmental Science, and Public Policy from Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Next up, representing IE, is Leah Thomas. Leah is a celebrated environmentalist based in Santa Barbara, California, coining the term eco-communicator to describe her style of environmental activism. Leah uses her passion for writing and creativity to explore and advocate for the critical yet often overlooked relationship between social justice and environmentalism. With this intersection in mind, Leah founded and launched the Intersectional Environmentalist, in 2020, a resource hub and platform that aims to advocate for environmental justice, provide educational resources surrounding intersectional environmentalism, and promote inclusivity and accessibility to the environmental education and movements. Leah, who is also the founder of eco lifestyle blog at Green Girl Leah, uses her multiple years of eco-focused educational and work experience to inform her ever-expanding list of projects, as well as her audience of more than 350,000 followers. A graduate of Chapman University, a graduate of Chapman University with a BS in Environmental Science and Policy and a cluster in Comparative World Religions, Leah has interned twice with the National Park Service and has worked at leading green companies, including eco-friendly soap company Ecos, and most recently Patagonia. A fundamental optimist and opportunity maker, Leah used her time after being furloughed during the pandemic to create Intersectional Environmentalism. Leah's writing has appeared in a variety of publications, including Vogue, Elle, The Good Trade, and Youth to the People. And she has been featured in Harper's Bazaar, W Magazine, Domino, GOOP, and numerous podcasts. And Destiny Hodges, representing EL. Destiny is an environmental liberation organizer and aspiring filmmaker from Birmingham, Alabama. She's the founder and co-executive director of Generation Green, home to the architects of the environmental liberation, ideological framework, and movement. Her work is rooted in the belief that climate justice and environmental justice are key components of Black liberation, along with building community and solidarity across African diaspora to build collective power needed for systems change. As a student of Black liberation movements with a love for narrative organizing, Destiny is embarking on a journey of documentary filmmaking as she organizes throughout the African diaspora. While organizing on Howard University's campus, Destiny and two other students founded the Howard University Student Sustainability Committee as a coalition/network of students and student organizations dedicated to sustainability and environmental justice on campus, holding the administration accountable and serving the surrounding DMV community. She's also the assistant producer and marketing coordinator for the Climate and Culture Focus podcast, the coolest show presented by the Pop Caucus. All right, well, now that we have got all the introductions, we can jump into some questions and really delve into, what these acronyms mean, and, what, like I said, where they got started and what these organizations are doing now and what they plan to do in the future. All right, so I think with the questions, we can go in order of Anthony, Leah, Destiny, but if you feel called to go first to any of the questions, definitely jump in wherever you like. All right, so the origin questions. First one is, how is your community, or not how, sorry, excuse me, who is your community and how do you define environment?
Well, first, I just want to say how big of an honor and privilege it is for me to be here with you all today. I'm blown away by the work that Generation Green does. It's long overdue, so thank goodness. And I wish this was around like about 20 years ago, but we're here now and we embrace the present. That's what we do. But to your question, I would say that first and foremost, I mean, my community is Black people. I got into this work not because of like pipelines and climate change, so to speak. I got into the work because it was clear from the outset of growing up in Harlem that there were things in my community that weren't in affluent white communities, including more bus depots, sanitation departments, and of course the toxic emissions coming from diesel school buses and highways that were purposely situated in Black communities. That said, also, I stand in massive solidarity majority with, poor Latina folk, poor Asian folk, definitely indigenous people, people indigenous to Turtle Island, I should say. And yes, even poor white folk, absolutely. I'm in the spirit of Fred Hampton and the Young Patriots. I wish that more poor white people would understand that we're not the enemy. And if you work with us, really great things are going to happen for all of us. But that's for another time. But yes, Black people first and foremost. I'm blessed to be the son of two Sierra Leonean immigrants, two professors of Howard University, which is why I didn't go there. But yeah, I just would not have had a life if I would have gone to Howard University. It would have been like the block where like Ms. Jackson looks at all the bad kids doing something, and when your mom gets home, she hears about it, like, what your son did today. So yeah, that wasn't going to happen. But when I think about environment, it's yes, definitely the trees, the open spaces, but it's also the social environment that we are seeing under assault in so many of traditionally Black communities. Harlem, for instance, is like no longer majority Black. And so that's harmful to me as a Black person. It hurts me, to walk on 125th Street now and see Trader Joe's and Whole Foods, in lieu of the African markets that used to be there when I was growing up. So it's also that social environment, the music, the food, and the smells that remind you that you're home. In addition to the synergy of the built environment as well as the natural environment. But none of that matters without the people. That I just think that the people are such a big part of that, and that's, I think, what calls us all together today. So that's my short answer. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I love that last part. None of that matters without the people. I think, yes, people, we're super important and part of our environment. Leah.
Okay, so the question was, what is community to us and what is environment?
Yeah, like really, who is your community? Yeah, and how you define environment.
Well, that was such a beautiful answer. It's kind of hard to follow that one up. That was just, wonderful. But I feel like it's something that I'm still figuring out day by day, I think. So I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and then I ended up going to school in Orange County, which is completely different from what I was used to. And I wish I would have done Black college. But I being in a lot of prominently, if my internet will let me know, being in a lot of white spaces as a Black environmentalist and oftentimes feeling alone, but over time realizing that I was never alone. I was just not in the right spaces where my people were at. So I feel like it's been a journey over the last year or so, just realizing, oh my goodness, there's this beautiful history of environmental justice and so many people that I can be in community with. So yeah, it's just a journey a little bit along the way. And I think this last year, which I'll get into a little bit more, so much conversation about like solidarity, BIPOC solidarity. Throughout all of that, I started to find a lot of anti-Blackness in some of those BIPOC solidarity spaces. I've just been gravitating more and more to just being a part of environmental justice spaces that are by and for Black people. That's a journey, lots of learning lessons in the intersectional environmentalist space. And yeah, I'm just excited to learn from all of you here.
Yeah, and that's definitely why we're here, as young people trying to learn from each other and grow as we're on this journey. Super important. Destiny.
Yeah, I guess that leaves me. And I hope y'all can't hear that. They're always doing construction in my apartment. DC is a place to be, but my community is Black folks. Any and everywhere Black folks are, any identifying Black person, that's my community. And I think when it comes to environment, especially at Generation Green, like we base our definition off of the EJ definition of environment, and of course, building upon that. So as mentioned already, it's like a complex interaction of the biological, so yes, nature, you know, the social, yes, the people, but also the political and social constructs that we make. So racism, white supremacy, you know, then that gets into infrastructure and structural things such as redlining, segregation, which Anthony mentioned, and so on and so forth. And so I think it's a complex interaction of a lot of social, biological, psychological structures that influence how we are molded, like how we survive and just who we are as people. And so that being said, like Blackness is its own environment. And we say that a lot at Generation Green because just being Black, like our bodies for one, there are so many agendas against us. So Blackness as an environment looks like me walking to a space and being treated a certain way before I speak. So that's an environment. And then physically, there are so many products that are targeted against us, whether it's like hair products or like the food that we eat, you know, the neighborhoods we live in, the air quality, that our physical bodies internally, it's its own environment that fluctuates, you know, based on what we're exposed to. And so I think that's what environment means to me. And it also means community, right? You know, like who are we, the social aspect, the people aspect, who are we talking to in the environment? What am I being exposed to? What's my relationship to the people? How am I loved? How are we talking? How are we growing? How are we healing? All of that is environment. So it's really hard to limit it to like, you know, just nature. Yeah.
Yes, yes, definitely agree. Thank you all for answering that question. I think, you know, as environmentalists, we get that question a lot, but I think for people who maybe not know you or heard about your thoughts on what, you know, where you come from, what it means to you, I think it's great to be able to hear that first out before delving into, you know, the meat and potatoes of this conversation. So, you know, we brought a representative really from EJIEEL to break it down. What does it mean? Why are you in this role that you are? How'd you get there? You know, all that. So, you know, I think the first question that I want to ask is, what role do you play in whatever acronym insert there? So EJIEEL. And what brought you to that work? You know, why did you, you know, branch off from EJ, or what brought you to transition? You know, what brought you to stay in EJ? Yeah, really, you can answer that. Okay, Anthony.
Yeah, this is like a really beautiful question. We could probably have a whole panel on this alone because you know, these beautiful acronyms need to be a part, like a quotidian part of the work, everyday work, right? So, you know, first and foremost, as Black people, we have seen so much of our culture co-opted, right? The United States of America is a manifestation of co-opted Black culture. You know what I'm saying? And we're seeing it now even with our terminology. So like when I hear intersectional, you know, the word intersectional, I get so protective now. It's like this Pavlovian reaction that I have of like, why are you using Dr. Crenshaw's words? And are you using them like in the right way? You know what I mean? Or are you just using them? And even, you know, liberation and revolution. I mean, you know, no disrespect to Senator Bernie Sanders, but like when he was talking like about like a political revolution when he was running in 2016, I was like, bro, do you understand what this word means, right? Robert L. Allen, the great author who gave us this amazing book called Black Awakening in Capitalist America, said we got to be careful, like, you know, when we're, you know, using words like that. And that, you know, in my particular instance, environmental justice has now been co-opted, you know, and I had to remind, you know, a white person the other day that like environmental justice was not, you know, forged in the classrooms of you know, prestigious New England Ivy institutions founded by inbred white supremacist Puritans, right? Like, you know, who funded said institutions on indigenous genocide and chattel slavery, right? Environmental justice was forged in the streets, in churches, in basements, in spaces that a lot of people who are uttering the word so freely today are still not welcome in because they haven't done the work to really embrace what this means. So environmental justice is proactive, right? It's not end of the pipe, which is what happens when it becomes, my word is academized, like too like sort of like what they did with jazz. It's like, you can't like, you can study jazz, you got to go feel it, right? It's like Charlie Parker said, you know, you got to learn all your scales and then forget all that crap when you get on stage and just blow and feel it, right? And so when we see it like taught in classrooms now, it's like this end of the pipe solution where it's like, no, we're trying to prevent harms. That's what justice is. So when people say things like justice for Breonna Taylor or justice for George Floyd, no, it's impossible. The technology does not exist for them to have justice because they would be brought back to life. That's what justice is. The justice is our communities not being redlined in the first place, not treated as energy sacrifice zones for the development mainly of white people's comfort and their energy usage, or to be the endpoints of the dirty detritus of myriad industries. So that's why I stay in the work is to make sure it's proactive. Now, quickly, what I'll say is that environmental justice is impossible without intersectionality. As my mentor, the great Elizabeth Yampierre of Uprose, all caps in Brooklyn, always reminds me, this has to be intergenerational and intergenerational work, right? And I love that woman so much. So you can't have environmental justice if it's not intersectional. There's no silos in environmental justice, and that's like what we're seeing now, unfortunately, with a lot of big Greens and historically white-led organizations finally come to Black Jesus moment in like environmental justice, Hamez, and then it's not exercised. The principles of environmental justice are not known, yet everyone's uttering Green New Deal. Principles of environmental justice from 91, and it uses the phrase reparations. Green New Deal doesn't use the term reparations. So, and then liberation, which Sister Destiny is going to talk about, absolutely, this idea of overcoming, everything that's been put upon us in a way that's proactive, so that it's like you're not going to put that smokestack in our community, and we will do whatever we have to do to prevent that from happening. You're not going to bifurcate our communities with freeways to transport mainly white people to and from the suburbs to the cities anymore. And you're not going to gentrify our communities. We're just not going to allow it. You see communities like Sunset Park, Brooklyn, as I just mentioned, they stopped Industry City. It was environmental justice advocates that told Amazon to, bounce from New York City. You're not coming into our city and saying no unionized jobs. That was like the EJ community. It was the EJ community along with abolitionists that basically shut down Rikers Island in New York and changing it to a green manufacturing hub. So all of these things are interrelated and interconnected, just like the crises that we're facing right now: climate change, capitalism, COVID, cops. It's all interlinked, and that's what environmental justice, I think, really needs to be at its root. Not these like weird definitions that EPA and NRDC or whomever else is coming up with these days. That's just not it. That's kind of like what Vanilla Ice did to hip hop. We're not going to let that happen to EJ.
Yes. Yeah. No, Destiny, you can go in. Go in.
Okay. I didn't want to interrupt. That fed my spirit. I appreciate that.
Yes, no, it did. Yes, I think it really gave a download on what it really is, what it means to be part of the EJ space. For IEEL, what are your thoughts? I guess I could say the question again, what role do you play in your space, IE or EL, and what brought you to the work to do what you do?
I guess I can hop in for a little bit. And I also want to acknowledge, the way people are using intersectionality without connecting it to intersectional theory and its purpose and its roots and like Black feminism and even Black queer feminism, it blows my mind. And I also struggle with that because I know that I must have played a role in that unintentionally by saying intersectional environmentalism and then seeing the ways people are using it when it is something that is very personal to me and so many Black femmes. And it's frustrating because I remember stumbling across intersectional feminism when I was in college at a predominantly white institution. And I was like, what is this? There's some women's march going on. There are no Black women present. People are not talking about the duality of what it means to be Black and a woman. And I remember it was kind of like these cool kids in college, and they were like, okay, well, have you heard of Kimberly Crenshaw? Here's this knowledge. You need to learn about this. Come to the intersectional feminism side. So over time, after just learning from so many amazing Black feminists, I don't know, as an environmental science student, intersectionality is kind of inherent to the work that I was doing because I couldn't look at data as just data. I always had to think about my Black identity. And I think that was something that was really frustrating when I was looking at, you know, GIS, and I was making maps about the placement of toxic waste facilities and looking at different identity aspects like race or wealth, etc. And it was so frustrating being a student and saying, okay, not one, but almost all environmental hazards are linked to race. Like, this is systemic, this is a serious problem. And being in some of those spaces, I felt like I was just like screaming at the top of my lungs, like, how can you not take an intersectional approach to this sort of data? And that started to follow me in so many different spaces, whether it was at the National Park Service, whether it was at, you know, shout out to Patagonia, I enjoyed working there, but in spaces like that, spaces that I had really dreamed of being in, and just getting so disappointed that so many people wanted to separate race, different identity aspects, and environmentalism. And it just didn't make sense, because there's an environmental justice movement, there's data. Dr. Robert Bullard has written like 16 books, like Hazel and Johnson, so many people have been doing this work. It's there. And even when you look at the Environmental Protection Agency, like, you know, cares about their definitions, but they know it's there, and they know environmental racism is real, and it's been around for so long. So I think last summer, I just was so fed up. I was furloughed from my position. I had some space. Again, I felt like I was screaming at the top of my lungs, and so many incredible environmental justice leaders have been screaming at the top of their lungs and having data to back it up. So I just started thinking about how safe I felt in intersectional feminist spaces, and realized that I needed to be in intersectional environmentalist spaces. And that can mean something different to everyone, but I really was just saying, like, I am no longer going to go to these marches for the climate if you all are not going to care about my people. And I think it really hit me. There was a march for like salmon or something that Patagonia was putting on, and I stood beside these white environmentalists marching for salmon. But during the Black Lives Matter movement, those same people turned to me and they were like, this has nothing to do with environmentalism. And I was like, how can this be possible? I'm not going to be a part of a type of environmentalism that does not advocate for the protection of my people. So I'm just going to take an intersectional approach to environmentalism that so many other people have done, and really just try to advocate for environmental justice. So to me, I think intersectional environmentalism is just a way of participating in environmentalism with the goal of achieving environmental justice, and really learning about the history of the environmental justice movement.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes. Destiny, you want me to read the question again, or you got it?
I got it. I'm appreciating this conversation. I'm pretty sure everybody listening, and probably all of us, are like now getting a better understanding of things contextually. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You know, it's answering some questions. I think when we talk about EL, right, which a lot of people are like, what is that? Or in the spirit of co-optation, as was mentioned, they're like, environmental liberation for everybody. It's like, we ain't necessarily, you know, not that we don't advocate for that, but that's not what we said. Environmental liberation, first and foremost, centers Black folks and Black liberation. That's at the center. So if anybody is talking about environmental liberation, then they are talking about Black liberation. If they're not, that's not what EL is. So environmental liberation is really Generation Green's foundation. You know, it's our ideological framework for how we move, how we do our work, to really claim a decolonized, regenerative, and autonomous autonomous future for Black folks. So we want sovereignty, and that could look like many different things for many different people. But we believe, you know, that the way to achieve that is to first look at what's going on in the world, you know, contextually, like what's our analysis, and the EO framework kind of provides one, you know, that the state of the world is rooted in capitalism, white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism, so on and so forth. And that's at the root of why we're in the middle of all this, including the climate crisis, right? Because the climate crisis is just an amalgamation of like social ills. It's an amalgamation of all these systems and structures created primarily by white folks and white supremacy that are now causing us to be in the situations that we're in. particularly with the most melanated people being the most disenfranchised and the most vulnerable and the most people on the front lines. So our analysis like first looks at it like that, and it's like, oh, all right. So there needs to be an Afrocentric approach to addressing all of these things. And we've seen, the Black radical tradition history, time and time again, Black folks resisting and Black folks practicing their liberation in whatever way meets them. And so we're saying that needs to continue, and there needs to be an ultimate manifestation of that in which Black people are actually liberated, in which Black people are actually free, autonomous, and have sovereignty. So first of all, EL is for and by Black folks. It acknowledges, again, our liberation, and that's at the center. It also gives that historical analysis, talking about how we got here. So the Arab and Indian Ocean slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, the genocide of indigenous people on Turtle Island, but not just Turtle Island, across the African diaspora. It also acknowledges imperialism, colonialism, neocolonialism, how all of that's still going on and plays a role. And it especially acknowledges the role of global racial capitalism, in which racism and capitalism really created kind of like hand in hand to uphold one another, and they always go together, are interlinked, produce this system of extraction that is people, resources, time, energy, place, etc. And that's problematic, and that's at the root of all of this. And then ultimately, EL transcends systems, right? So we want to meet the immediate needs of Black people by focusing on community building, as we call it, noting that, we might not always have to go through state or government routes to achieve our liberation. It might start right here. This is a manifestation of EL actually being able to come together in community and discuss, who we are, how we're showing up, what we want, what we envision, collaborative ideation, just thinking about what is the future and then building that together. So that's a lot of what EL is, especially with that analysis. And I think it's really, really important to make the connection between EJ and IE, especially with these understandings and contexts that we're given today, because EL wouldn't be possible without EJ, right? That's what we were studying. That's what all of us who developed this framework were looking at. But we also acknowledge that EJ is not the endpoint, as Anthony said. And so we're like, well, what is the endpoint? Justice, how can you really achieve justice under a system that was meant to disenfranchise you? That's its whole premise. Like, justice doesn't seem possible. And then what is that? Because that term is thrown around so much. It's like, what does that really mean? And so for us, we're like, liberation, that is the ultimate goal. That's what we're striving for. And if you throw environment in there, that gives the context of the definition that I mentioned and how we define it of it's all intersectional. It's all complex. It's all connected. And so we have to strive for liberation by approaching these systems, this crisis, these issues in a very intersectional, holistic way. I think holistic is probably the word that we use, but of course that incorporates intersectional. And so we have to do it that way. And we have to be radical and revolutionary. I'm going to use those words because in order for us to achieve environmental liberation, Black liberation, there has to be a revolution. Meaning, and I wouldn't even just say a revolution, there has to be an evolution. So that's like the main word in there, because we're not just trying to like switch who has power. We're trying to completely change the power dynamics to give to those who are the global majority, right? And so in doing that, that means we have to completely flip shit, like build from scratch. And building from scratch needs to be based in like African or Black centered principles, because we've been doing this work for as long as we've been alive. We've always been caring about our environment, our ancestral connection to land. Extractivism is not how we operate. So we have to base all of that in those principles and be radical and revolutionary about how we actually seek to obtain our liberation. And Generation Green has an environmental liberation manifesto, which we're in the midst of updating, that kind of breaks down the different categories of how we really get to that, and what are all the pieces. Because if we talk about this being, so intersectional, there's so many different issues, right? There's so many different areas to approach the work through. So I mean, like you have, sovereignty, which I mentioned, which is like political power, economic power. You have land, so ancestral land reclamation. You have like clean air, water, waste, all of that, health and wellness. So holistic health, housing, energy, it goes on and on and on. But the way we're doing it is not approaching it from a one-dimensional lens or a single issue. it's noting the totality of it all, and then noting that, okay, well, if the most melanated are the most disenfranchised, we are all Black at Generation Green. We need to center Black principles, Black liberation, Black folks, Black love, Black community. That's what we do, and that's how we approach it. So that's what EL is. It is very intersectional, and EJ was, what we were studying and what we understood to build upon. So all intersectional, all interrelated.
Thank you. Thank you, each of you, just really giving everyone a download on what it really means to be part of that acronym and then how you got there. I think a really line we can see from each of you when you discuss is that when you got into the work, it was you trying to imagine a future that was not rooted, in capitalism or colonialism, trying to break away from that. And I think that is really what we can see in our goals are trying to imagine a better future. So I'm gonna transition into our next question. I think for both environmental or Generation Green, EL, and then Intersectional Environmentalists, both of these organizations kind of bloomed really, or started during the pandemic, the uprisings. But with Anthony, your organization, you're a veteran in the EJ work, like you said. So how did you see your organization change what it was moving to? And you do a lot of policy work. A lot of people, especially white people, realize, okay, wow, yeah, let's listen to them and work towards, these justice issues all connected. Wow, mind blown type thing. So how did your organization change as this really started during the pandemic? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're still changing. I mean, there's just a lot of work to do. I've let people in my organization and other organizations know that these spaces are still not safe for Black people. I mean, even as a director, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's still not necessarily safe. I'm a Black man, you know what I mean? And in a majority white space with power, you know what I mean? That's like dangerous and I'll use the term like revolutionary, but in a way that's may not be may have a negative connotation for some, because I'm mindful of what Patrisse Cullors-Khan once said, which was that what I do know is that white folk will always protect white lives over Black ones. Yes, even the anti-racist white people, because we're talking about, as the sisters have also spoken about, like a program, like literally the matrix. My sister Yande Indigo, great grassroots organizer, Black woman organizer from Philly. It's like we're in a matrix system where white folk can turn into Mr. Smith and be racist without even realizing it. And just like as men can do the same thing with sexism and patriarchy. So I want to lift that up as well. But we're still in the process of changing. And I hate to say it, but I wrote a piece about 6 or 7 months ago, really showcasing how white support for Black Lives Matter has plummeted and lower than it was before George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were killed. And the amount of white people who say that race is a big problem in our country has also plummeted to lower levels. So it's almost like what an indifference a year makes rather than what a difference a year makes. And it all goes to show, because of this matrix effects, like the moment you stop paying attention to it, and that's how white supremacy works. It gets its power through invisibility and complacency. So I'm not coming on here to say that I work for this racist organization and people should be concerned. I mean, you should be concerned, but we should always be concerned. I mean, these spaces have been in existence for a very, very long time. Not one summer of consciousness is going to change that, and neither are Black Lives Matter signs that are starting to fade in the sun. Melanin doesn't fade in the sun, but Black Lives Matter signs do, apparently. And with that fading also comes a fading of consciousness. So I would say that it's changed in the sense, at least, of we have a DEI committee now. I think every organization has it's like the new Black Lives Matter sign, right? Like a DEI committee, and we're working. But I think that what has changed a bit is that people are starting to get a little more comfortable with discomfort And, they certainly brought in me, I like, as my friends like to say, I'm openly Black. I've got openly gay friends, openly queer friends, I'm openly Black, and they're open to hearing what I have to say. But, and that includes the fact that these progressive spaces are not safe for Black people. They absolutely are not. And until we realize that and actually put in the work, they're not going to be.
Yeah, I think it's important that as the uprising started, there were so many people that said, yeah, we're going to really make these changes, and it has, for the white people, dwindled into the dust. And I think that we have to, realize this is like movement building work. We have to continue to move. And I think that's really what we're seeing with Generation Green, i.e., like we're bringing people together to reach for that vision in the future, to make those changes. So I guess for Leah or Destiny, do you, I guess, how do you define movement? Do you think that your work is like movement building work and will continue to, bring those people on into the future and make those big changes, drastic changes?
Movement. I think back to Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, and the way he emphasized, it wasn't just him, also Malcolm X and many others, the importance of organizing and mobilizing. Heavy on the organizing though. I think what defines a movement is a base, right? So having somebody to actually mobilize and organize, and then being able to do both of those things consistently for as long as it takes in a replenishing way, in a sustainable way, to accomplish whatever the goal is. Like, that's a very high level definition. That's how my brain works. But I think that's what makes a movement. And of course, it's a lot more intricate than that, right? What also makes a movement is community. What also makes a movement is having an agenda, strategies to get there, and having space to have dialogue about what we're doing, where we are in that, and where we want to go. I think that's a really, really big part of it, especially is having a roadmap. Like, I think so many times for so many people, they get into movement work, right, or activism, and they're like, okay, how can I contribute? But it might not be presented to them. What's the roadmap? Like, what is the whole goal? What's the whole picture? How does this action like really play a role in getting to whatever we're trying to get to? And what do you want? Why are you here? What are we collectively trying to go? And that's what makes a movement. And so I think that's a part of organizing, right? Like, at Generation Green, we talk about, who's in the community, who is the community. So like, what are the relationships there? What do we bring to the space? What are our assets? What's the plan? What do we all want? What are our collective values? And then we're like, what do we not want? Maybe there's something we don't want there. Let's remove it, or let's build something. Let's make a strategy for that. How do we do that? Who do we know? Who can bring it? And how do we implement it? And how do we evaluate it and keep it going? Like that's a very foundational definition or pathway for like anything start to finish, but most definitely a movement. And then organizing and mobilizing people throughout that to take specific actions or to become leaders and build up their capacity in that, to do it for themselves. That's a movement. It's like very, very intricate. These are just small parts that I'm bringing out. And so I think EL is most definitely movement work. Like, we're building a whole movement structure. We're in the lab a little bit, so stay tuned, I guess, for folks. Building a whole movement structure that will very seriously help us realize and actualize environmental liberation. And that looks like mobilizing and organizing all types of Black folks across the entire diaspora, right? Because we're not just a domestic focused organization. We believe in the power of the diaspora, collective power. And I guess that's another part of movements, right? Building collective power to change whatever it is, whatever action or whatever thing you want to disrupt. That was a long way to describe movements, but that's what a movement is to me. And so this is how EL is a movement, is that we're constantly making these connections. We're constantly fostering collaborative ideation. Like, what do you want? Where are you? What do you think about this? Contribute. Let's build this out together. Let's strategize together. And let's achieve environmental liberation together.
Yeah, snaps.
I feel like I'm just in awe of both of you all, first and foremost. But yeah, I guess when I think about like intersectional environmentalists, there's the platform intersectional environmentalists, and then there's also just the concept of intersectional theory, connecting it to environmentalism, and then there's a definition. that I typed up on an Instagram post, and honestly wish I could go back and tweak, but it's kind of out there already. So we'll see how that's going to go. But I guess when I think about IE as a platform, I don't know if I qualify it as being a movement, but then when I think back to how it happened, it does have that grassroots momentum. Like, you know, like it just kind of happened. Like it wasn't just me, but suddenly there was like a group of 20 incredible environmental activists from all over the world and online educators and you know, academics that just came together to form the IE Council. And then we worked together with the help of our, I guess, online community. And our primary focus is mainly education, I guess. So just giving people educational resources and then also trying to point them in the directions of the organizations that they can get involved with in their local communities. And I think that is something that I really want to put a little bit more intention behind and purpose behind, because I completely agree with what was said earlier. You need to have a statement of intention and kind of define a space. And when IE started, we were constantly just pumping out resources, trying to synthesize environmental justice information, share. And actually right now, we're actually just going to be offline for like a month because we want clear statement, we want clear programming. Now also to do that, okay, to pause your organization doing just to make sure. I would say something that about IE that we're really trying to be a innovator. So maybe people can come to our events and that's when they meet someone and then they can form their organization, or maybe we can collaborate with another organization like Generation Green so people can start learning about environmental liberation and then they're going to be a part of that movement. So I guess we're pointing people in the directions of the movements that they are part of and to give them the tools to start their own movements or participate in a way that feels right and genuine to them. So I don't know, maybe some people would call that a movement. I don't know, but I would say we're a movement pointer in the right direction, or that's not a word, but we're going with it.
Love that. The movement pointer in the right direction. I mean, it's all needed. It's all needed. I think that's what is essential for us to understand. There's everyone can be a part and needs to, you know, realize that every part is needed. Every direction pointer, every, you know, EJ is all needed. We're getting close to 150 or 2:15. It's 1:57. I want to jump into a few Q&A questions that have been put in, so I'm gonna get into that. The first one, let me see. All right, okay. How should we balance leveraging the resources and capacity of white spaces in the environmental movement while staying and on-oriented toward liberation? I guess anyone could go in there and answer.
This was the one on leveraging the resources.
How should we balance leveraging the resources and capacity of white spaces in the environmental movement while staying on-oriented toward liberation?
Yeah, you know, what I've always said is that a major component of this work is navigating contradictions, right? So, you know, on the one hand, we've heard of, you know, Sister Leah brought up earlier, the great Dr. Robert Bullard, you know, and we've heard this recently that a lot of Black-led organizations have taken money from, you know, Jeff Bezos's new foundation, and some people have feelings, you know, about that, and you know, I'm just like, people who are upset at said Black-led organizations taking that money aren't writing checks. No, right? They're not. They're just criticizing. They're not writing checks. And we know for a fact, as I've said, that you know, we have, like, if you will, a banana republic situation in the environmental community where 2% of the population controls 98% of the wealth, and 98% of the population is really in a cauldron of scarcity culture, trying to get 2% of the wealth, right? And so I do think that there does need to be some climate reparations, and there needs to be some reparations for how these grassroots Black-led groups have been treated in, white philanthropy spaces for too long. I think that, you see a lot of clothing stores, 1% of the money is dedicated to eco or whatever. I think about, 5% of the budgets of some of these bigger white-led organizations, some that I'm even on the board of, should be dedicated and throw down. Don't just say environmental justice, tape up Hamas principles on your walls and whatnot, exercise it. And then, yes, I do think that as it pertains to capacity, one thing that we do in New York Lawyers for Public Interest, we're all pro bono, you know what I mean? And I think for me, I try to take as many calls as I can of just you need help. The vast majority of our lawyers are white people, at NOPI. Let's put them to work and see how they can, best assist your communities. That needs to happen, across the board. So, suffice to say, that I think, in wrapping up, when I do not feel bad about taking white people's money to do good work in Black communities, because Black communities have been taken from since the country was stolen. And I also do not feel bad about putting white people to work to assist, not lead, not be in front of, but assist with the liberation of Black peoples. And this is why Generation Green, in my opinion, is so genius, because of this idea of the diaspora. That has to happen across the country and the world, because people, I still don't think they realize that when we read about Haiti, right, it hurts us as Black people, just as when we read about the Democratic Republic of Congo, or what's going on in South Africa, or what's going on in Madagascar, or what's going on in the United Kingdom. It really, it's traumatic, for all of us. And I think that, yeah, white folk need to step up in a way that also makes them step back, as well. As Sister Leah brought up, Kwame Ture, just finishing up, in the amazing, if people haven't read this, SNCC's Basis for Black Power, right? This is just this document, it's still, germane to this day. And it says white people really want to help. They should go where the problem is most manifest, which is their communities, where the racism is the anti-Black racism specifically is generated and maintained. But in short, I sleep just fine at night, taking white people's money and using white labor to do for Black liberation. I'm gonna sleep great tonight too.
Yes, I 100% agree. We gotta get the funding somewhere, so they might as well give it give it to us. Destiny, Leah, do you want to weigh in, or do you want to move on to a different Q&A question?
I would just say really quickly, I would agree. I was doing an audit of big green. So a lot of these mostly conservation focused organizations, they're bringing in $200 million per year. And a lot of that funding is also going to paying some of their executives. So when you look at the budgets that are going to environmental justice focused work versus some of this conservation work that's funded by these huge foundations, the discrepancies are awful. So I completely support a 5% for climate reparations or 5% for environmental justice work, because it's just insane. There's a side-by-side comparison about this funding that just came out. So Grace, who's the founder of PGM1, the People of the Global Majority Outdoors Summit, which is really incredible. She just posted it on LinkedIn. So I'd recommend checking out that study that goes into the discrepancies of funding between these big green orgs and environmental justice focused work. And then, yeah, I think people will sleep really well at night taking some of this money if they do that.
I'll be real brief because I just want to give an anecdote so that people can really understand why, yeah, we should be taking the money. And I think for another statistic, donors of color noted or did research, and just 1.3% of US climate philanthropy goes to BIPOC, which I don't like using that term, but for the sake of what people, align with and can understand, just environmental justice groups. So that's a problem right there. And we've been speaking to, young Black organizers, environmental organizers all across the diaspora. And many of them will straight up tell us about these big green organizations who we know about domestically and how, trifling they are. And then internationally, it's the same thing, and even worse in many cases, where a lot of the funding that they're getting, they'll use to build an office there, to pay for transportation there, to fly their folks in, to not even really do the work or listen to the community. And then they won't pay the local people interning or that they're using to take pictures of to then get more funding. So I'm saying that without trying to get too specific on many instances, but there are a lot of these groups who have, I'm going to take it beyond 200 million. They have $1 billion budgets. They're the total, like with all the organizations, comes out to X amount of billions of dollars, and it's all being spent in a way that doesn't really support Black liberation at all. And their spaces, as Anthony called out, are still harmful to Black people. So yeah, give us some reparations, you know, and climate reparations for real too, outside of just the philanthropy space as well, but both, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of a question about, I'll make a comment on it too, because you all really answered it. But you know, being part of this work, you know, you have to stay grounded in what you believe in. But I mean, when you're finding money, I mean, like people need to give back. They need to give back what's owed. So I mean, I don't think morally that's incorrect. That's what we were saying right here. You know, taking that money as we're trying to build and transform our communities is super important. So I'm gonna go on to another question. All right, so this one kind of tags Generation Green as having a strong praxis. So they're saying this is critical for being transformative in environmental work. With the growing awareness of EJ and subsequent co-opting of EJ, how can people be better about subscribing to a praxis and building a critical analysis on the work?
That's an important question. I love Kwame Ture. He was not a perfect person, but great to study in terms of organizing and movements and liberation. Both him and, is it Charles Hamilton? There's a book called Black Liberation. I'm forgetting the title right now. This is bad. I've had a long day.
Sorry to cut you off. Says a Black Power Politics of Liberation.
Thank you. I didn't want to mess it up. I got it on my table. But anyways, in that book, they talk about political modernization. And I think that is so important and probably the way to answer this question, right? And this is something that is key to Generation Green and the EL like framework and movement is the starting of, again, that assessment, like what is going on? What are my personal values? What are my community's values? And what's going on? Does it align with that? Like in the systems, the spaces I'm in? If it doesn't, what needs to be done to change that? And how do we build capacity and infrastructure to do that? And I know this might sound like a very probably perhaps wide way to answer that question, but I think a way that people can better subscribe to a praxis and building a critical analysis of the work is by first starting with asking themselves, what do I value? You know, like what are my values? Are those even problematic? That's a question that people should be asking themselves too. And then like in their communal spaces, have those conversations and then decide, well, if something doesn't align with what our values are, then how does that need to change and how do we go about it? And it starts there because I feel like the way this, capitalist society, 21st century, even digital age moves so fast, we don't have time or we aren't allowed or allocated time to just sit and assess. And so a lot of action takes place without like a situational analysis or a critical analysis, and people are just doing stuff. And then, that's really hard to avoid once you get pulled in it, because then you're just everywhere, especially in this movement work and in activism. It's so draining. It shouldn't be, it should be healing work, but it's so draining within these structures that we have to operate in a lot of the time. And so we don't even get to have our own analysis. We're kind of like indoctrinated into the analysis of whatever the organization is or whatever the mainstream movement is, which is why it's so dangerous and is actually a barrier to Black folks fighting for their liberation. Because we're not given the resources, the time, the safe space, or community to even be able to make that analysis for ourselves, right? Or in the presence of other folks that we're in community with, other Black folks in the diaspora. And that's why Generation Green is the praxis that you mentioned, and is such an important, theory, framework, and movement that we're building, because we center that we know that has not been allowed to really happen in a healthy way, in a sustainable way. And we want to feed into that. We want to activate that. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, great question. I think that was awesome to get into that and delve into that. There's a few more questions on here, but we're close to time. So I think later on we can have like follow up, have these people, wonderful people, answer these questions. So I want to delve into a few, like looking into the future and what we imagine ourselves, what these organizations to be doing. So, just really straightforward for each of y'all. What does the future of EJIEEL look like? How can we work together in building that future?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, you're seeing that the future's looking pretty good with sisters like Leah and Destiny not waiting for some proverbial torch to be passed down, but like, build our own torch and light it, ourselves, which is a beautiful thing, to see because as Destiny just said, regarding Kwame Ture, an imperfect person, the environmental justice community was also founded and by imperfect people whose shoulders we stand on, but there were some analysis mistakes, some organizing missteps, as well that need to be overcome and navigated, which we will do as Black people, not in front of like white people, by the way, like that's super very, very important. So I think that the future is this diaspora model, though. When I first met Sister Venus King at Black Oak Collective gathering of drinks and hors d'oeuvres and everything, and she told me about Generation Green, I was just like, wait, what? I just started reading this book by Robin Hayes called Love for Liberation, and there's this term called diaspora underground, which is what independence activists did back in the 60s, like a diaspora underground of like, how are we coordinating with, Black folk in Ghana, Black folk in Haiti, etc. I think that's going to be critical moving forward, because look, bottom line is, we're not stopping climate change, right? We are trying to keep as many people alive at this point. And for me, that means how many, the greatest amount of Black people that we can keep alive, because we're in danger in Brazil, we're in danger in Puerto Rico. You see what they did, what's still doing to Haiti for having the nerve to overthrow their oppressors. They had to pay for its reparations. What? And we still see like the WTO and the IMF saying, you N-words are never going to do that again. You know what I'm saying? Without us telling you that you're allowed to do it. We need a diaspora underground, which is what Generation Green is doing more than ever, because we're in danger, for that reason. So I think that that's going to be the move of the movement. Is like this: we have to get back to this mentality of African diaspora and international solidarity, because we can't just do it here in the United States. They can't just do it by themselves in Haiti or in Colombia, where they have an Afro-Colombian population, or certainly in Africa. And I think going back to the beautiful work that Ghana was doing when Maya Angelou was going over there, Haj Malik was going, Kwame Ture, Du Bois, et cetera, Ali. We have to get back to that, really, really quickly, and create this inexorable connection with the continent, with Africa, because Africa is going through hyper events of climate change, and right now going through a new phase of colonization as China and is out there colonizing the continent on that mentality of we will do whatever works and call it communism. So yeah, international solidarity, the Gen Green model, I think has to balloon. No disrespect to Sunrise, no disrespect to Greta Thunberg, but the future is Black women and Black people liberating themselves and not asking anyone for permission on how and where to do that.
Hey,
Yeah.
I had to say, but wow, okay. I don't even I don't know how to follow that up, but okay. So the future the future of IE as an organization, I think really spending time to put intention behind the work that we do and defining the purpose of it. I think the momentum of last year was great in a lot of ways, but it's also, I think we need to take some time to talk about how it can kind of be traumatizing to Black-led organizations that suddenly had all of these people saying, we're so invested in anti-racism. And then like what was mentioned earlier, like the attention is kind of pulling away. And now we're finding out who our real community is, our core community, and like who we want them to be. So I think we're going to be spending a lot of time in development, and we've been testing out a lot of events as well. I read a really great post on Generation Green maybe earlier in the year about self-care, the origins of self-care, and it was just so beautiful. So I think that's something that we want to start tapping into with intersectional environmentalists, more healing spaces for organizers to be able to come to. And we've been testing that out with Black Girl Environmentalists, another really great organization, and we've been doing pop-up events safely all over the country, whether it's like an eco-poetry workshop or a place for people to go to a regenerative farm and just learn about the true history of regenerative agriculture. So that makes me feel really, really good. So I think in the future, we want to create more of those healing spaces and do it in collaboration with people who are doing this work. So yeah, I really want to continue on just defining IE as an organization that's all about coalition building and finding ways to leverage the community that we have to partner with other organizations and create spaces that are healing and also educational in nature. So we've also been testing out lectures and things like that. We had a lecture series not too long ago, free and open to the public, about Black feminism, about intersectional theory. Hopefully people will stop co-opting these terms. But you know, the least we could do is offer some lectures. So we're going to keep doing that as well. And yeah, and then I hope the future will be brighter. I hope the future will be better. And with people like the people on this panel, I know that that's going to be the case. And I am going to be shouting about environmental liberation at the top of my lungs, because it's such an amazing concept, and it's something that people need to know about, and they need to know about it now. So I'm just excited to be a part of that journey.
Gonna make me cry on here. I was holding back tears while Leah was talking. I think it's just mostly because it's really powerful when radical Black minds get together. People that are pioneering work, like that's incredible. That's really powerful. So just being in the space of like, I think it's hit me a little bit. I'm like, wait, you know, like this is beautiful. We love beautiful Black people, beautiful Black conversation. I think the future of EL, it's a lot of what Anthony said. So I'm like, dang, you know, like, I'm glad that that's being seen and understood, because we didn't want to be misunderstood and we didn't want to be co-opted. And we're not going to be, but I really appreciate you being able to see it for what it is, because it's a lot of that. And that underground diaspora model that you're speaking about, reciprocal solidarity, is exactly how we do our work. So we do diasporic organizing, which I'm realizing I hadn't said yet, but that's a really key part of EL. That's like the activation piece, right? There's the framework and the understanding, the analysis. The activation is diasporic organizing, in which basically we share strategies, solutions, actors, targets, actions, information, and community and solidarity with one another to actually build collective power, right? So that's the future of EL. It's diasporic organizing. And we might have put that label on it, but that's been going on for a while. You know, it's been going on for a long time. And Anthony called out many of those situations. I mean, when we think about in the 50s, the 60s, and back even more, like different African countries gaining their independence and helping each other do that, and folks coming across the diaspora and even lending a hand in armies. Like that happened, that took place. And then sharing strategies and pulling up to different conventions, you know, the Pan-African Congress, wow. Anyways, places like that, all these things have happened. So we're not doing anything that's just straight out of the blue, brand new. We're practicing Sankofa and we're practicing Afrofuturism. So we're looking back constantly, like what happened, you know, what went wrong? Where did people stop in their organizing journeys? Not by choice, but because of force and, you know, infiltration and interference. And how do we pick up the torch in some of those places? And also, how do we connect with some of those people that are still here? Because there are so many revolutionaries, there are so many activists, there are so many movement and thought leaders that are still present. And I think a lot of what some of the white-led movement spaces or, you know, visions of the work do is erase or start from their agenda's time point. And that's really evident with the environmental movement, because climate change did not start with the Industrial Revolution, right? It goes back far beyond that with the onset of colonialism, extractivism, slavery, et cetera. But they choose to start at that point. And then they choose to highlight certain people that are like the role models and erase other people, right? So we're not in that framework. We don't operate in that. That's over there. We operate where we center all the people that came before us, right? And we look at their strategies. What have they done? what are they still doing? Because again, people are here. How do we connect with those people and find out more and gain the wisdom that's intergenerational? And then how do we seriously organize as a diaspora? How are we connecting with our brothers and sisters in Kenya, in Haiti? Right now, Generation Green is going to Houston. One of our members are already in Houston to help with asylum seekers. You know, like that's diasporic organizing. That's really showing up and gathering resources, whether it be funding materials from across the diaspora. And so that's the future of the work. And we're actively doing it right now. And so I just hope you all support that. It sounds like some people do, and join us, you know, if you're Black, and if you're white, hey, shed some cash, shed some resources, send it our way, send it to the way of the folks on this call, because that's reparations, right? That's accountability, that's healing, and that contributes to environmental liberation. So that's what the future looks like for me. It looks like all of us right here.
Yes, awesome. I love this conversation. This has been wonderful. Thank you, everyone being in community, those that are, you can see us, so we can't see you. Thank you for being part of this. I really want to offer, you know, you all one last chance to like, say something, closing remarks, anything you'd like to say. And then we can, you know, dip out of here.
Yeah, I'll be real quick because I've got some amazing people I need to take outside to enjoy this beautiful day. So first of all, if you can get outside and just breathe, Black people. Let go of like anything you're holding in and the stress, it kills us. And we need us all here. So please go outside and breathe. That's what I would say. Something that Sister Destiny said that like, I think triggered something that I would like to say in closing, going back to Kwame Ture and Black Power politics of liberation, this idea of language and narrative, right? Because what Sister Destiny said is right. This idea of an Anthropocene is bullshit. We have a racial Capitalocene that goes way back, you know, from when bodies were stolen, plants were stolen and brought, and that all contributes to the climate crisis. So it's this idea of language, or even when you see people say we have to act on climate, I say, no. Climate justice, right? We have to act on climate justice, not on climate. You know, what does that mean? And you know, we have to control the narrative, our narrative. The moment that anybody else starts to control our narrative, that's how you go from Robert Johnson to Elvis Presley. And you saw what happened in the blues. That's how you go from Rakim to Vanilla Ice. You know, and so these are our stories. Please, they are sacred, y'all. They are sacred seeds, just like our indigenous folk to Turtle Island. Like, yo, we have to harvest the seeds and make sure that the seeds are there for future harvest of Black leaders like Destiny and Leah. You know, it's our story. So take that narrative, hold on to it tight. And remember that when you go outside, you know, right after this to go get your air and just embrace that. There's a motto for this Black clothing company that I use for all my workout gear called Actively Black. And their motto is there's greatness in our DNA. Don't ever forget that, y'all. Like it's real, because no other group of people has done what African Americans in this country have done, created an entire culture from scratch that was so dope that people are still co-opting it and extracting from it. The only people in history understand that. And then hold on to your story. And thank you so much for this. This is like, feel so good right now. I feel so good right now. That's all I can say.
I just wanted to say thank you again for having me. And then for anyone who's listening, to find your unique skills. Everyone can contribute to a movement that they care about. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was like, every movement needs an accountant. And I'm like, that's true, because these finances are like really difficult. So whatever it is, you don't have to be someone that you're not. Like with me, I'm a writer. I happen to have a blog. I know how to use social media. So that's something that I can contribute to the movements that I really care about. So just remember that, you know, find your unique skills, chase it like hell, apply it to the movements that you care about, and yeah, just be you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, like, dang, I don't really know what else to say. I just want to say thank you, Anthony and Leah, for pulling up, for showing up in the ways that you do outside of this space and in this space. Your work, your time, your energy is appreciated. Thank you to those who attended. And I guess in closing, I think like, this is just a really powerful conversation. We're gonna chop it up so y'all can see it on social media. But this is really powerful. And there were a lot of keys, if we just wanna leave it at that. There were a lot of keys dropped in here. And I think to kind of maybe do a synopsis, because I don't know if we'll have time for that. EJ is kind of where it started. You know, that's where we saw the birth of B'Elah. And there were a lot of people who came before that term was created, right? And laid the foundation and did the work for the movements and advocated for themselves and their community to seek what we have now defined as environmental liberation. You know, these are just labels, but the root of it has been around for quite some time. And intersectionality is always a thing for Black people. You know, we live intersectional lives. As Audre Lorde said, we don't live single issue lives, you know? So I think that's kind of the root. And now we're able to see a progression of what's becoming. And that's so beautiful, especially to define, like as Leah said, with IE being like a movement connector. That's needed, right? I don't know many spaces like that exist generally to connect people to movement, and then to be building an actual movement with EL and building capacity and offering resources with IE and EJ still continuing. I mean, it is being co-opted, but still continuing to lay that foundation. And some of the elders or veterans in that space being able to pass the torch, such as Anthony, who's here today. And he's not an elder, y'all. Like he's a veteran in the movement, but he's not an elder. He's still out here working, to clarify. But yeah, like that's so beautiful. And so the future is a continuation of that, right? It's a continuation of Sankofa, of reflecting, of building actively, and of envisioning the future and then actualizing that. And that's what we're doing here today. And I think that's what everybody on this call will continue to do. And hopefully others that are listening will get inspired to do. And I just want to leave it at that. And say that you can find Generation Green on Instagram. Most of y'all probably already follow at generation__green. You can find Intersectional Environmentalism. And I'm gonna let Leah and Anthony actually say the handles and or the websites, although I dropped 2 in the chat.
That one's perfect. We're on Instagram at Intersectional Environmentalists, and that's also our website.
We're not an EJ group, so I'm not going to take any space away from either of you two. It's all good. Your handles are, yeah.
All right. Well, that being said, thank you again, everyone. And I really hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Get out of here.